932. Aldous Huxley publishes Brave New World, a warning about a world where humans are grown in labs, happiness is chemically guaranteed, and freedom has been quietly retired as unnecessary. He was horrified. He was sounding the alarm. He wanted the reader to shudder. The reader shuddered. And then several generations of tech visionaries picked the book up, treated it as a roadmap, and started methodically building exactly that world, with the enthusiasm of pioneers on a frontier. This is not an exception. This is the pattern. The most dangerous books in history were not written by villains. They were written by people with bright eyes, clean consciences, and absolute certainty that they were saving the world. That certainty is what knocks out the brakes. That certainty is what turns a noble text into a detonator. Today, 10 of those stories. You're watching Academic Troll, the right place for people who want to understand the world and not die of boredom doing it. Like, subscribe, let's go. Book 1. Marx and Engels. The Manifesto, a manual nobody ordered. London, 1848. Two bearded intellectuals, one perpetually in debt, the other bankrolling him, write a pamphlet about the suffering of the working class. 23 pages. The goal? Free the workers from their chains, end the exploitation of man by man. Marx himself had never set foot in a factory. He wrote about the working class the way most people write about Antarctica, with great conviction and from a considerable distance. But the theory was airtight. 70 years later, their text had become a state religion. 100 million people, by some estimates, died from what grew out of those 23 pages. The Gulag, the Great Terror, the Cultural Revolution, the Khmer Rouge. These weren't bugs in the system. They were the system. Marx wanted to destroy the dictatorship over the working class, and got dictatorships that workers themselves built, guarded, and rotted inside. He wrote that religion was the opium of the people, and communism became the bloodiest religion of the 20th century, complete with its own saints, relics, inquisition, and human sacrifice. When someone tells you today that real Marxism has never been tried, the price tag on the previous attempts was 100 million bodies. The most capitalist state on earth, China, still officially calls itself Marxist. The revolution devoured its own instruction manual and kept going.
Book 2. Chernyshevsky's What is to be Done? A Catechism with a Delayed Fuse. The Peter and Paul Fortress, 1863. A stone cell, damp walls. A political prisoner sits down at a table and writes a novel about what the ideal human being should look like. The hero, Rachmaninoff, sleeps on nails. Literally, he spreads nails across his mattress and lies down on them, to harden himself, to never think about his own comfort again. Rachmaninoff slept on nails the way future revolutionaries would sleep on ideology, with total commitment and no visible discomfort. Lenin read it 5 times, said it plowed him up. The Bolsheviks passed it between each other like a secret handshake. That particular type of fanatical, ascetic, cold-blooded revolutionary, the kind who signed execution orders with the same calm you'd use to sign a grocery list, was grown right here, in this cell, on this bed of nails. Chernyshevsky wanted selflessness. He got people who had so completely stopped thinking about their own comfort that they found it equally easy to stop thinking about everyone else's. He died in 1889. The revolution was still 28 years away. He never knew what he built. Some books come with a delayed fuse. Some authors are lucky enough not to see it go off.
Book 3. Orwell, 1984. The novel they read as a tutorial. Scotland, 1948. A wind-battered island off the west coast. Orwell is gravely ill, coughing blood, tuberculosis eating through him, and writing his final warning to humanity. Big Brother, Newspeak, the Ministry of Truth, Doublethink. This must never happen, he was saying. The world read it and said, thanks for the instructions. Newspeak was rolled out under the banner of inclusive language. Rewriting facts in real time became a professional skill. The Ministry of Truth now goes by Communications Department, and Big Brother lives in your pocket and calls himself a smartphone. Orwell despised Stalin and everything Stalin built. Today, his book is quoted simultaneously by the people building surveillance systems and by the people fighting them. Both sides find their justification in his pages. That's what makes it a universal textbook.
A novel that was supposed to be a vaccine turned out to be a virus, with an infection guide printed on the inside cover. If Orwell had lived to see it, he would have laughed, through the coughing, bitterly, for a long time, because he described exactly this outcome across 284 pages, and no one understood what he meant.
Book 4. Machiavelli, the Prince, the patriot who became a byword for treachery. Florence, 1513. Machiavelli is in exile, tortured, thrown out of politics, dumped on the roadside. He writes a slim book, wants to get back to court, wants to be useful to intelligent rulers. Essentially, he writes a cover letter, the most influential cover letter in the history of human civilization. The Medicis ignored it. He never got the job. What did he write? That an honest prince must know how to be both lion and fox, that promises can be broken when necessary, that cruelty sometimes serves, that it's better to be feared than loved. He thought he was describing how power actually works, stripped of illusions. The world took that description and turned it into permission, as if a doctor wrote "the patient has a fever" and the readers decided it was a prescription. The Prince became the bedside reading of dictators, party secretaries, and political strategists across the following 5 centuries. Stalin loved it. Mussolini loved it. Hitler loved it. It's still being leafed through today, in offices where very different portraits hang on the walls. Machiavellian now means moral flexibility and cunning. He was a patriot who loved Florence and wanted a strong state. They named the lie after him.
Book 5. Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, The Philosophy They Picked Up Wrong. New York, 1957. A woman the Bolsheviks drove out of her own home as a child sits down and writes her personal Bible. A thick one. Very thick. Over 1,000 pages. The central idea? I have the right to my own life, my own mind, my own success. No one can demand sacrifice from me. Altruism is a moral trap. A strong person should not apologize for being strong. The book became a cult. Silicon Valley adopted it as a founding document, libertarians made it into a manifesto, and a certain type of ambitious 25-year-old found in its pages the philosophical scaffolding they'd been looking for. You've met this person. Smart, successful, slightly superior in manner, explaining at length why they don't owe anyone anything. Rand wrote about titans who built civilizations. She got people who used her arguments to avoid splitting the restaurant bill. The gap between the hero she imagined and the human she attracted is, in its own way, a masterpiece of unintended consequences. At the end of her life, Ayn Rand, seriously ill after lung cancer surgery, enrolled in Medicare and collected Social Security. The very programs she had spent decades attacking from every stage as the face of creeping socialism. No statement accompanied the enrollment, just a signature on the forms.
Book 6. Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, the book that saved the birds. 1962. Biologist Rachel Carson publishes a book about what pesticides are doing to the natural world. Birds falling dead from trees, rivers without fish, fields without sound. She wanted to save the birds. The chemical industry's response was swift. Hired scientists, coordinated press campaigns, and the general energy of people who have a great deal of money invested in being right. They called her hysterical and unqualified. It didn't work. The book sold 500,000 copies and rewrote the law. The EPA was created, DDT was banned across most of the developed world, the environmental movement found its voice, and Carson became the patron saint of a new political religion. Then the mosquito came back. In the developing world, restrictions on DDT hammered the fight against malaria. Critics of the environmental movement count millions of deaths, mostly children, mostly Africa, though Carson's defenders dispute those figures. The WHO never issued a full ban on DDT for public health use. The argument has never been settled. Rachel Carson died in 1964, 2 years after publication, of breast cancer, a disease researchers have since linked to prolonged exposure to industrial chemicals. The woman who warned the world about what those chemicals were doing to living things had been living inside the experiment the whole time. The birds are alive. The debate about everything else will probably outlive all of us.
Book 7. Paul Ehrlich, The Population Bomb, the scientist who was wrong in both directions. 1968. Biologist Paul Ehrlich looks at the population growth curve and is gripped by terror. He writes the book, There are too many of us, and if nothing is done, famine, chaos, the end of civilization will arrive by the 1970s. He demands urgent action: birth control, sterilization, restriction. Governments moved fast. In India, mass forced sterilizations. Millions of people, often without consent, often without explanation. In China, the one-child policy, forced abortions, the killing of infant girls, a demographic wound the country is still bleeding from. In the West, an entire generation of environmental policy built on the assumption that human beings were the problem. The apocalypse never came. The Green Revolution fed the growing population, the forecasts collapsed, and Ehrlich, consistent to the point of stubbornness, revised absolutely nothing. In 1980, he bet economist Julian Simon that metal prices would rise as resources ran out. Lost. Kept predicting. Here's the specific horror of a wrong idea with scientific authority. It generates real policy before anyone notices the error. The machinery starts, and machinery, once running, doesn't stop because the math turned out to be wrong. Now the developed world is in a panic about a demographic crisis. There aren't enough people. If you live in a country where the government runs ads encouraging people to have more children, Japan, South Korea, Germany, Italy, half of Eastern Europe, you're living inside Ehrlich's error. One frightened scientist, one bad graph, the exact opposite catastrophe delivered on schedule.
Book 8. Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin, The Word That Turned Out to Be Stronger. Boston, 1852. A writer wants to end slavery peacefully, not by war, but by words, by compassion. She believes if people see slaves as human beings like themselves, hearts will crack open and the chains will fall. No violence, no politics. Just a novel. The book comes out. It becomes the best-selling novel of the 19th century. 400,000 copies in the first year. Serialized in newspapers, read aloud in parlors, translated into 37 languages. In the North, tears and outrage. In the South, books burning in the streets, counter-novels published to prove her wrong, and state legislatures debating whether owning her book should be a criminal offense. It was already too late. She had handed the country a mirror. Half of it liked what it saw. The other half tried to break the mirror, and ended up starting a war. Abraham Lincoln meets Beecher Stowe in 1862, and according to legend, says, "So this is the little woman who started this great war. 600,000 dead, more than all other American wars combined up to Vietnam. Slavery was abolished. The price turned out to be exactly the one she had wanted to avoid. She wanted to move people's hearts. People wept, and reached for their guns."
Book 9. Upton Sinclair, The Jungle. Aimed at the heart, hit the stomach. Chicago, 1906. Journalist Upton Sinclair goes undercover into the meatpacking plants, spends months inside the machinery of working-class hell, then writes about it. He's aiming at the heart of American capitalism. He wants to show how people get ground up. Immigrants, the poor, those with no choices. The book comes out. A scandal. Just not the right one. Readers were not horrified by the lives of the workers. They were horrified by what they were eating. Rotten meat, rats in the sausage, blood and filth on the conveyor belts. The country demanded clean food. Theodore Roosevelt launched food industry reforms, sanitary standards were established. A victory, just not for the people the book was written about. The workers got almost nothing. Sinclair wrote about this himself, bitterly. "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident, hit it in the stomach." The manifesto became a catalyst for reforming the very system it had set out to destroy, and helped capitalism survive by making it slightly more civilized. The hygiene standards you take for granted at the grocery store are a side effect of one failed manifesto.
Book 10. Charles Darwin, On the Origin of Species, Science as a License. London, 1859. A quiet, sickly scientist spent 20 years putting off publication, afraid of the scandal. When it finally came out, the scandal arrived, just not the one he'd feared. Darwin was explaining the mechanism of evolution in nature. No politics, no ideology, just an observation. The most adapted survive. What he hadn't anticipated was how badly people wanted a natural law that confirmed what they already believed. The white race is simply better adapted. That's science. Social Darwinism. The weak and the poor should disappear for the sake of progress. Eugenics. Breeding better humans.
sterilizing the unfit. In the United States, Sweden, Germany, tens of thousands forcibly sterilized before anyone called it a problem. In Nazi Germany, it became state doctrine and the scaffolding of the Holocaust. The word scientifically is the most powerful word in the modern arsenal. It doesn't add truth to a claim. It removes the burden of having to argue for it. Insert it before any prejudice about race, gender, class, intelligence, and the prejudice stops being an opinion. It becomes a finding. Darwin gave us the mechanism of natural selection. What he actually discovered, without meaning to, was the mechanism of intellectual laundering. And that one runs on every generation.
What we are left with. Not one of these authors was a villain. Every single one was sincere to the last line. Every single one thought the danger was out there, in the world, in the system, in the people who hadn't read enough. None of them thought the danger was the book itself. That's the thing about a text with a good argument. It doesn't need a bad actor to cause damage. It just needs readers who are certain they're the exception, the ones who understood it correctly, who will apply it wisely, who won't make the mistakes all the others made. Every generation picks up these books with absolute certainty that they're the ones who finally get it. That certainty is the only thing all 10 authors had in common with everyone who came after them, including, almost certainly, you.